We would like to provide you with an opportunity to offer Council any additional comments or feedback if you wish to do so. Take the microphone. If you're joining virtually, please ask us a question in the question function, and we will begin addressing questions as they are raised. We'll all allocate about 15 minutes to this section of the meeting. And if we need more, we'll have a post-meeting report citing questions and our responses. Please note the questions that are similar in nature will be grouped together. So, anybody with questions, please feel free to come forward.
Thanks for that, and congratulations on the strategic plan. I was on top of that, I was wondering if there was any thought in terms of actually codifying our climate response within the architectural framework. Is there a potential to add or augment our standard of care that we have in terms of the public interest?
I don't know how to answer that. When you say codify, what do you mean?
I think maybe one example could possibly be where we do have a duty of care, a standard of care for the public in terms of how we respond as a profession and as architects. Would there be a potential to add something in there in terms of responding to climate action and codifying it, saying that architects must do this?
Well, in a way, we are, because we're going to have mandatory courses that you have to respond by educating yourself. So that I believe that to be step one. Personally, I think our efforts are better spent pushing the government to have regulations that allow us to have some ground to stand on with our clients. I mean, I'll just give an example of the AODA. I mean, if you'd said to a client, oh, you have to put a $100,000, $200,000 ramp at the front of your building before AODA, they would have laughed. And now, no one's laughing. And we need that kind of teeth for climate action. So I don't know if I'm answering your question. If somebody else wishes to answer it better than that, Christy Mills, somebody else, please. I don't know if I answered it.
Somewhat. You just basically said that there's going to be no adjustment to the Architects Act to include for anything relative to climate change and our response to it.
You know, we haven't, part of our strategic plan is to actually work on a response to modernizing the Architects Act. That is one of our very serious adventures right now, and I think it's a review, and we will take that under advisement, that's something we should consider. And I'm going to ask Christy Mills to shout an answer if you wish, because you look like you're going to stand up.
I don't actually have an answer, but I know it's a really good question. And hi, Dermot, I think you might have the same question. And I think it's actually worthy of a lot of discussion at the council table when we look to modernizing the Act, because we do have the standards of practice and standards of the profession within the regulations. So I think it's a really important topic to be talking about in the coming years when we look to take a modernization of our Act and regulations to the government. And at that point, it will also be up to the government to decide if this is appropriate to be in the Architects Act that governs the practice of architecture. So I think it's a timely question, and I think it's really relevant and something the Council will definitely be considering in the future.
Hi, thank you so much. So in terms of equity, inclusion, and diversity, what are you doing to combat the toxic industry that leaves students, interns, and emerging practitioners without a living wage?
I'm going to probably ask Christy Doyle to answer that.
Am I?
You could come up here.
Is my mic live? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. I mean that's a huge question and a good question. I think over the past couple of years, our council has really been looking at that very closely, and we started with a membership survey that we did in 2019, and there was some very disturbing things that came about in terms of that survey. We implemented mandatory continuing education around EDI. So that's one thing that we hoped would make some headway. And I'm happy to say actually that we just completed the second demographic survey that we have committed to, the council is committed to, and within that there is a question about treatment and certain things around how you feel about in the workplace. And we're actually pleased to say that the response is better than it was the first time around. So, you know, tiny little pieces, but we're hoping that that's moved the yardstick a little bit. Our council and the OEA is committed to continuing that pressure on the government in terms of changing the Employment Standards Act so that architectural practices are subject to the terms of the ESA, which speaks to things like overtime, paying for overtime or lieu time, hours worked, breaks, all that kind of stuff. So that is certainly another really concrete initiative. I mean, we're in an election cycle now, so I'm hoping that we'll probably pick that up afterwards. And, without, going on, we've created a page on our website that is really focused on equity, I'll say diversity, equity, inclusion. So there's that piece of it as well with a lot of different resources, information. We're trying to augment that on an ongoing basis. And I think the last thing I would add is that the presidents, successive presidents, Susan, Katie, Curtin had done it as well, and presidents before in terms of a letter to members to say, you need to treat your interns properly, and that's something that we will continue to do in the future, even though if you're not subject to the ESA, you should do it anyways. So I'll just, if I could just leave it at that, Susan? Sure. Yeah, okay.
Just a follow-up, is there any disciplinary action being considered for practitioners who do not respect their junior staff?
Well, what I would say is that if it's on our website and it's on the EDI pages, that if you go there, we did issue a document, a bulletin, a number of years ago about safe workplaces, and trying to highlight information about the treatment of staff, whether they're interns, any staff, and to provide resources as well. It was an employer piece, but it was also an employee piece to try and highlight for individuals resources that they might have, recourse that they might have, whether it's through the OEA or through, human rights or other employment standards action. But at the end of the day, there is, and the registrar maybe's left because. Oh, where are you, Christy? Oh, there you are, Christy. I know there's direction in that document about if you feel that there is a, I'll call it the clause that talks about a conduct unbecoming of an architect, of a member, that is something that could be subject to complaints and discipline at the end of the day.
I see that Dermot had his hand up before, and I want to just acknowledge the order. Do you want to grab that microphone?
Thank you, Susan. And I think I just wanted to follow on with the question on the topic of climate change that we've addressed in this conference. And I wanted to congratulate you because it's been, I've found it quite interesting. I feel I've learned a lot, and we'll take a lot of that back. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I teach the practice program at Daniels. And we did a couple of things this year to try to, first of all, understand what the Architects Act, what is it about the Architects Act? Why is it so powerful? Why is it so influential? And it really kind of controls a lot about, what we do. It has a principal purpose, protecting the public. It has a series of sort of 5, objects that it undertakes to ensure that the public's protection at certain levels through our ethics, through our processes, through our practices. So we created a kind of an assignment, and the assignment was, is it time? Is it time? Because I talked about the importance of the Architect Act as opposed to regulations, which are sort of, you can consider them supplementary general conditions in a way because they're very changeable. But whether at the core of the Architects Act and those 5 objects that are there, is it time now to add another one addressing climate change as the core? So is it time to go back? And I stressed at the time, to open up the Architects Act is a big deal. It's an important thing. But is it time to do it, or is it past time to do it? Because it's key. I think what I've heard from this conference is that yesterday, listening to the risk associated with, the risk mitigation with regards to our responsibility and how the public sees our responsibility in mitigating climate change. Architects are really open and liable, I think, in many ways that we don't quite understand yet. So I think these are kind of looming issues that we have to address. But again, what we found was that overwhelmingly, virtually every graduating student from Daniels this year's class said, yes, it's time to open up the Act, and yes, it's time to address in a prescriptive way our obligation to the environment. One of the models we used was the AIA Code of Ethics, which has an obligation to the environment as their sixth object of their many objects. It's a prescriptive code of ethics, but that actually takes you through complaints and discipline once you start to, if you don't honor those obligations. And those obligations have 6 categories within the environmental portion. So I'm just putting it out there as an example of some of the things that the OEA can do that can impact how we practice architecture. And I want to throw out one more thing as well too, because once you do make a move to do that, then all kinds of things start to happen. One of the other things we did is we looked at the OEA document 600, and we sort of dismantled it in a way and saying, can we absorb and can we change the basic SD, DD, CD portion of our scope of work and include within that fundamental sustainability, climate-related deliverables that we would be obliged to undertake, that every client would understand that we'd be obliged to undertake in this agreement. And again, we're finding more and more that there are sustainability agreements. We use the AIA as an example. They have a voluntary one. But if at the core we could address the environment at the core of the Architects Act as one of the objectives, then I think all these other things would start to follow in terms of how we practice. I think that's the influence that the OEA has. So we're not only going to talk it and get others and obviously work with allied organizations and make those changes, but we're actually going to have it at the core of what we are as an organization. So that's my question. And it sounds like you're talking about it. So anyway, thank you.
Susan, there's a question there.
Thank you, Dermot. I mean, that wasn't really a question. That was more a suggestion, a very important one, and information from U of T, from Daniels, and this is the big topic. So thank you. So the question that has just come up is there a plan by the OEA to further support the role of architects in Part 9 and 11 by potentially further reviewing the role of so-called designers with BCIN that generated the current fabric that we see? Who would like to take that question? Person who laughed the loudest. No, I don't know.
Well, we don't regulate designers, so
I have to keep referring to one of the two Christies to take on. This is a very big historical question as well as a present question.
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
No, I think maybe you should come up here.
Can my mic be on? Hello? I'm on. Yeah, another huge question or statement, but I think, at the root of that, so we don't regulate BCIN holders. We don't regulate the scope of practice if what you're talking about is that which is below the threshold, which is regulated by the Architects Act. So, all I can say about there's a couple of discussions going on at Council right now. It's an open meeting discussion, and some of you may have seen some information that was released earlier this year. It may have been late last year, just about the discussions that are happening around certain exemptions within the Architects Act around, I'll say, the use of firewalls in certain instances. So it is a discussion that's happening. I think, these bigger, broader questions are all part of what will likely become part of a discussion around the big plan about the modernization of the Architects Act. And you guys saw the strategic plan. One of those pillars is about regulatory leadership, and it's about reviewing the Architects Act. So what Dermot's talking about around sustainability, this type of issue is all part and parcel of probably that big discussion. So I would say, everything's on the table for that discussion, because that's probably where that would lie. We don't control, we don't regulate those individuals right now unless they are holding themselves out or they are over their scope in terms of moving into the protected scope. That's what I could offer right now, Susan. I don't know whether there's anything else.
I'm not seeing any other hands up, and, oh, sorry, the light is in my eye, sorry. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you. So this is more of a question about continuing education. I'm not there yet, still an intern architect, but as someone who is very motivated to learn as much as I can and finding opportunities, and I really love the fact that you've brought in sustainability as part of continuing education. However, now with things having gone online and, with previously continuing education, I'm assuming, would have been in person and you actually be there and you're attending these educational seminars. In my experience, what I have noticed now is that a lot of people would just put on their educational seminar and then continue doing what they're doing and not actually pay attention to the seminar that they're supposed to be paying attention to. So my concern is that something that can be regulated, or is there a way to actually make sure that people are paying attention to what they're learning or they're supposed to learn? I'm not sure if this question makes sense.
Maybe that's a scolding. Pay attention.
Or even have something like put your cameras on, right? Like something as simple as just put your cameras on. Just because you're at home does not mean you don't have to get ready.
I have found in some of this webinars that I've been in that there is a series of questions that you need to answer, which makes you pay more attention. That is something we could take to our continuing education committee and people working on webinars to kind of, it's not even a scolding, actually. I'm going to change that. It's more a way to engage people. Maybe we need to think about engaging people in a way that is more compelling to pay attention to. So thank you for that comment. Tina? Okay.
Thank you. Lachman Azar, Toronto. I served on the practice committee when we first created Document 600. And Document 600 has grown to be a much better document now. I have to admit that I'm impressed with the improvement that have been made over the years. However, I was concerned back then with the Clause GC5, and I still am, and I want to share with you my concern. And GC5 deals with the architect responsibility for construction costs. And even in GC5 mentions that because of the volatile situation and different approaches and processes in the tendering, the price of the construction varies quite a lot, but yet it fails to remove the very dangerous sentence there, which shoots us architects in the foot by saying that if the project was not within the 15% from the budget, then architect is supposed to redesign so that the project comes within the 15% construction budget. Now, construction budget is nowhere is defined, and as mentioned in the article itself, is very volatile, unpredictable, and construction costs, even today's market, with the COVID, with all the shortages, with all the problems that we have, is completely in nobody's control. So why do we have to put architect responsible for that? I changed that in my contract with my client. I say specifically, under no circumstance, architect will be responsible for the cost of construction. Whatever it is, it is. Market-determined factor. Architect responsible to design to the client's requirement. If the client says design a 10-story building, I'm not responsible to tell him that, look, 10-story building is higher, exceed your budget. We should design a 5-story building. That is, I think, a mistake, and I'm hoping that by sharing this with you, Council will take a serious look at changing this article that hurts the architects more than anything else. And if I have been, by the way, subject of this clause in the project $10 million, believe me, is no party to have to go to redesign your project. Thank you.
You know, that commentary is very relevant right now, and we will take that thought back to council and back to practice and back to people working on OA 600 and debate it. And we'll also talk to Prodemnity, because it's also very interconnected with what kind of liabilities we're taking on with the new landscape that we're in. Thank you. I'm going to read another question. It's compared with the AIBC and other provincial associations, stronger fights against illegal practices of non-architects. Has OEA reflected on the architects' ACT omissions? What will the OEA do to make any improvements? And what major challenges does the OEA have? I don't know who would like to take that question. I guess maybe, is this something, Christy Mills, we could talk about? Whether, you know, the first part of the question, stronger fights against illegal practices of non-architects. These might, again, be more concerns rather than questions that we can just answer on the spot now. So I'm hoping, if that's okay, Christy, that we take these questions very seriously, and the truth is, these are not the first time we've heard these questions. This is not the first time we've worried about these issues, and so we will take this back and come up with some kind of a response paper on our website to these questions that are really too complex and big to answer in a quick Q&A. So thank you for these questions. But you know, you can always email us with these questions as well, and we will respond to them. And I just want to thank you all very much for a very long afternoon. I hope it wasn't too grueling. And this concludes. I'd like to, I guess I'm putting a motion forward to adjourn the meeting. Can we see our voting cards? Do we all agree? Is it time for a drink and party? Okay. Yes, the motion is passed, and we are adjourned for this year's AGM. Thank you very much for attending. Very good.